Good morning. Today is March 11th, and my name is Michael Conley. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations with the North Reading Public Schools. And today I'm going to present a brief presentation that talks about the various revenue offsets that are part of an annual school budget, and in particularly the fiscal year 25 budget requests for the North Reading Public Schools. So, if we get into the budget funding sources and we start to look at really what makes up the revenue that funds a total school budget, you have various sources. Essentially, you have your operating budget or your general fund budget, and that's the budget that is approved at the annual town meeting. And that is essentially supported by the local contribution, which would be the Proposition 2.5, local property taxes for residents living in the community, as well as state aid, which is money coming in from the Chapter 70 program, as well as government local aid. And there's certainly other, local receipts, that revenue the town has from meals tax, motor vehicle excise tax, fines, forfeits, payment in lieu of taxes, other local receipts, annual local receipt estimates that all go in to fund what essentially becomes both the school and the town's general operating budgets, supported at and appropriated at an annual town meeting. But beyond that, which is what this presentation is going to focus on, is you have special revenue funds. So the school department receives federal grants annually, state grants. Then we assess fees for various programs like busing, kindergarten, tuition, athletics, extracurricular clubs, and performing arts. And that the revenue from those programs all come in to support the expenses directly associated with those programs. And then you have other revenue like funds we receive from gifts and donations, and certainly funds directly associated with PTOs and PTAs that help fund enrichments and class field trips and a variety of other activities. These all work together to fund essentially what becomes known as the total funding of a school budget and the total experience for the student in North Reading. If you look at this pie chart, this just breaks down the revenue and the percentage of where is the revenue sources and how much of the pie can be contributed to such. So the municipal contribution, again, this would be obviously the local property taxes, makes up the majority of our revenue coming in to fund the budget. 73% can be contributed to the annual property taxes, which are limited by Proposition 2.5 in terms of their increase, but that's the majority in a community like North Reading of the revenue. We have state aid, which is the next largest piece of the pie at about 17.7%. That's Chapter 70 aid plus local government aid. Then we have our revolving and special funds. So we have the funds that we collect user fees from, tuition costs from, rental costs from, like facility rental, kindergarten, preschool, athletics, busing, performing arts, student clubs. All those fees go into revolving funds that help directly offset the operating budget in the school department, and those funds are about 6.2%. Then we have our annual federal grants. We receive entitlement grants for special education, for professional development, for a variety of other sources, technology, and these grants make up about 2.5% of the pie. Other local sources, that's a smaller piece, but again, that is the local receipts I spoke of earlier. The town has permitting fees, licensing fees, meals tax fees, motor vehicle excise tax fees. All those make up the other local sources piece of the pie, and then a smaller portion is the state grants that we receive, as the majority of our grants are federal. but we do receive the state circuit breaker program, which helps offset special education expenses, probably the largest piece of a state grant. But that's all the revenue. Then if you look at a history of this offsets in North Reading, you can kind of see that we are above $3 million, peaking last year in fiscal 24, where we were at $3.5 million. And as we expected, with the ending of many grants that we received through the COVID-19 pandemic, are coming to an end at the end of this current fiscal year, 2024. Those revenue offsets are declining, and then you see that reflected here from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25. And that's kind of what you're seeing by the decline here from 3.5 million to about 3.1. But for a long time, we were at about 2.5 million of revenue from grants and revolving accounts offsetting the budget. We then in fiscal year 1920 we increased some user fees to raise that revenue. Then we received even greater amount of revenue in fiscal 21, 23, and 24. And that was mainly because of, with the COVID-19 pandemic and coming out of COVID after fiscal year 20, there was a lot more federal revenue that was available to schools and towns to help them monitor the impact of losses due to the pandemic and additional costs. But now those are coming to an end. So you saw that rise in 21 through 24, and now you're seeing those come to an end. So you're seeing those decline as we enter fiscal year 25. So that just presents an additional challenge in the school department budget. Okay. So let's take a look at our federal and state grants, particularly for schools. We have the Early Childhood Grant. Federal source of income helps support preschool paraprofessional. We have our Teacher Quality Grant. These are annual grants that we rely on an ongoing basis. Helps support our mentor program and professional development for our new teachers. Title I for our Title I eligible schools, middle school, Hood Elementary, Little Elementary, helps support tutoring in the areas of math and reading at these schools. We have what's known as the IDEA grant, Special Education Grant, which helps support special ed inclusion paraprofessionals, special ed transportation, and special ed contractual services to provide direct student support services for students that are receiving special education services. We have a federal resource in the Summer Academy Grant, which helps support professional development for staff over the summer. We have a digital literacy grant, which specifically is geared towards technology and professional development for our staff in the areas of integrating technology into the classroom. Then we have the state circuit breaker grant, which is the largest portion of the pie for state funding, and that helps support special education out of district tuition costs. And the state circuit breaker program is designed to assist districts with providing a level of reimbursement which has been 75%, specifically for special education tuition costs, and now recently for transportation, that are above a particular threshold, typically 4 times the state average foundation budget per pupil amount, which is approximately $52,000. So what that means is, if you look at a particular student receiving an out-of-district tuition or transportation cost in North Reading, once that cost is greater than $52,000, let's say it's $82,000, they take the delta above the threshold of $52,000, that $30,000. If the cost for that child is $82,000, and that $30,000 is reimbursed at 75%. So 75% of that $30,000 is essentially what North Reading would receive in reimbursement. So it's certainly a good chunk of revenue, but it's not certainly offsetting all of their costs. So we would expect to receive a reimbursement in the amount of $22,500 for that student as part of that program. So I want to look at the COVID-19 relief funds, and you can see this is really a history of what we were able to receive as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 3 years in North Reading. And none of these funds will be available next year. And many of these funds have gone away in the last couple of years, but certainly they will all be expired as we approach the end of this current fiscal year. But it's a vast, huge majority of funds that help support a variety of expenses. Many of these expenses in terms of embedding the district with technology costs, the need to add to our mental health staff, the need to add to our technology staff, the need to add to our school health staff. Those positions are very much part of the program that we have instilled, and it's important that we continue that. So those costs now need to be shifted towards the operating budget in some cases. But if you look at these costs, really over the last several years, we were over $2 million of grants that help support the district that are no longer going to be there. Our last and final current COVID-19 relief fund is ESSER 3, and this is expiring at the end of June 30th. We chose to spend this $451,000 in half of it in 23 and half of it in 24. But that supports a floater nurse, and 2 adjustment councils, and a technician. And these funds need to be shifted to the operating budget for next year. If you look at our revolving accounts, we have athletics. The user fee and the gate receipts essentially support all of our athletic expenses: transportation, supplies, rental costs. The coaching costs we've broken out of the revolving account and placed that in the general fund. And we've tried to have the user fee and the gate receipts support all other expenses: uniforms, materials, equipment, rental costs, insurance costs for athletics, transportation costs for athletics, officials, game personnel. Any other direct expense would be supported by a user fee being assessed and any gate receipt we receive at events, athletic events, that is. Student club advisors stipend, $200 is charged. $60,000 helps offset the cost of those advisor stipends at middle school and high school. Performing arts, there's user fees that are assessed on a rolling schedule per activity. That revenue helps support the cost mainly of stipends for those positions in our theater music program. Transportation, we do charge a bus fee, $425, for a individual bus pass, $700 family cap. That yields $285,000, which is a direct offset to our regular transportation budget. Full day kindergarten, we've been reducing this user fee, but we do assess a fee for kindergarten and preschool, all work to offset teacher and paraprofessional salaries. And then we have our food service program revenue that is essentially generated by federal and state reimbursement with the free universal free universal breakfast and lunch program that has been in place since the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you look at this chart, you can get a sense of what that level of user fee contribution that I referenced here, what it's working towards offsetting. And in many cases, but you can see by this chart, we're offsetting a small portion of the actual direct cost of that program. So busing, that current user fee listed there yields $275,000, which is only 30% of the direct cost to support the 12 large yellow school buses per day. Athletics, as you can see, small proportion, 33%. The $60,000 generated for extracurriculars, 45%. The 28 to 30,000 annually generated for performing arts supports about just under 50%. Kindergarten program had historically only supported about 30%. If we start to move to a free full-day kindergarten program and just spend that account down to zero, which we would do over the next couple of years, we're looking at supporting 20% next year, 20% the following year, and then we would be supporting 0%. There'd be no funds remaining in that account. Preschool program, with these tuition fees for students paying in that program, 36% of the actual cost. In aggregate, we're about 30% of our actual direct costs of these programs that we are assessing a user fee or a tuition cost. If you look at the general fund request for next year, $40,679,524. The grants and revolving accounts I just spoke to represent a little more than $3.1 million. So we're really spending school department funds of $43.8 million. But then we also accept donations and have our PTOs that help support various programs, enrichments, class field trips, other donations for athletics, performing arts, technology. So we're actually spending even greater than the $43.8 million on an annual basis. So again, as we look to move through the FY25 budget process, these are other key dates on the calendar. Budget webinar on the 29th, public hearing on the FY25 budget on April 8th. School committee budget vote is set to be 22nd, and the annual town meeting is set to be June 10th. We certainly have challenges to overcome this year to close what is currently a wide budget gap between what the community can afford for our operating budget and what we have in available revenues and other sources like grants and revolving accounts, so we don't impact services here in North Reading. So I hope you continue to kind of tune into this process as we move through the next several weeks, and I appreciate your attention, and I hope you learned a little bit more about what makes up our offsets in a school department budget, in particular in North Reading. Thank you for your time today.